And now to a lovely part of our country, Dorset, where George Biles, born at the turn of the century, is still working full-time as the inn-sign painter for the local Bridport brewery.
I was born in Bridport, 1900. Gives me my age, doesn't it? Which I don't broadcast more than I have to. My parents realised my potentialities with regard to painting and apprenticed me to a local signwriter and decorator who did, well, signwriting and that, but not pictorial work, not to any extent. I remember when I was an apprentice, one of his sons painted a figure of Britannia, one with a shield and that, and, well, she looked dreadful. She looked like a bag of spuds, you know. And he looked at me when I was looking at it. He said, "Can you do better than Biles?" I said, "I think I can, sir." So I had a go at it, you see, and it was put up. It was erected, that sign. Well, that was the first sign I painted, but that wasn't for Palmer's. That was for Weymouth Brewers.
Well, George first started doing inn signs first, just after the Great War, about 1919, 1920. And although we had a few signs painted on canvas at around the Great War time, most of them were painted on steel, and they were just signs with wording on. They didn't have any pictorial side at all. And so from the 1920s, he's been doing them continually till the present day. So we're talking about something like 65 years on and more.
Palmer's, for whom I do most of my sign, leave the design mostly to me. And I try to paint opposite the signs, opposite sides to the subject. For instance, the Boot Inn, North Allington, when the soldiery stationed in the town was rounded, and the girls used to fawn over these smartly dressed men until one of the local lads chucked one of them in the river. The royalist one side being fawned over by the woman, and the other side a fisherman fishing an old boot out of the river. And another one was the Mason's Arms, for instance. Well, now, the Mason's Arms, Palmer don't understand how it came about, but the locals call it the house. I painted a mason on one side, working on stonework, and somewhere in the picture, there's a mouse eating crumbs of cheese. The other side is the Mason's Arms, as it is in the book, the Guild of Masons. The sun, for instance, the local sign called the Sun, instead of painting the sun, like the insurance company, I painted the sun in the form of a sun, part of it, the sunflower, and the sundial. There's a sign I just finished now for Sorghum of the ferry. Well, now, my subject was a ferryman taken several years ago, but the background is the same as it appears now. Well, now, the water was the most difficult part of that sign. It's a flowing river, as you can imagine. The fisherman was fairly easy, and I put the fisherman in for and painted the background around him afterwards. The most difficult of subjects are horses. The coaching horses. There's several coaching horses about that I painted. The biggest sign I painted was not for a brewer at all. It was 15 feet long by 5 foot high, of Noah sending out a dove. Another nice sign with several figures in it. Figure of Noah's wife and sons, and one or two of the animals around. The queerest sign I've ever painted was one called the Triple Plea for Great Yarmouth. That was a figure of a man dying in bed with 3 figures around. The doctor for his body, the lawyer for his money, and the parson for his soul. But in the background was old Methy.
Pub signs probably started in the early 1800s. We're not quite sure. Our pub signs probably started then. They might really just have had little boards outside outside the houses. But the pub signs were of steel, with just, as I said earlier, with just the lettering on until about the 1910s. And that is when the canvas sign came in. And now, but from canvas signs of the 1920s and early 30s, all the signs since have been painted on marine ply, and these signs are made up in the brewery by one of our craftsmen, Andrew Samways.
The inn signs are now made with marine ply. They have been made with a thick hardboard, which wasn't satisfactory. They wouldn't stand the heat on the hardboard. Well, this marine ply is a thicker substance, and being marine, it's got to stand rough uses, sea water and all that sort of thing, and that's what we paint it on now. The modern signs done in recent years are more carefully looked after. They clean them, I specify, twice a year, and wax with a car polish. And make them last, they will last 20 years. Of course, to know pub signs, you know, sign writing involved calligraphy. And one of the best jobs of that kind I did was on the occasion when Princess Margaret came to this town to open a pageant. And I made a very elaborate design that was presented to her. I've had altogether 5 apprentices, but only one could paint pictures. And he was a chap named Hallett. He's dead now, unfortunately. He was 11 years younger than me. And I remember one job I gave him to do was the royal oak of Charles in the tree. You know the story. But he was in the wrong clothes. He was dressed up like a smart gentleman instead of a groom. So I had to get rid of that and paint another one with groom's clothes. You know what the story, you know? And Charles eventually escaped down a lane called Lee Lane, which is about a mile on the east side of Bridport, which can still be seen, but they widened it now, and the picture I'm painting at the moment was the stone as it was when it was erected.
Well, apart from all his famous pub signs that George has done for us over the years, he has done many pieces of artwork for us, where it has been as large as painting motifs on the side of our lorries and vans, or producing minute, detailed artwork for items such as drip mats. So very wide-ranging. Some of his most latest sign writing was on a dray which is even older than George himself, which was probably the oldest dray that we had, dating back to the 1880s. The reason why it survived was because it was one of the more attractive drays, and it was used regularly for deliveries until the 1930s. The dray is painted in the livery of it as it was 100 years ago, in blue and red. And George did the sign writing on top of this. We're very lucky because we still to this day have one of the original handlers of the dray, Ron Hawkins, who's still with us after 45 years of service, still working with us today. And he was the last person to use the dray brewery. Blue is very much a feature of George's signs. Blue is really one of the Palmer's colours. All our signs have the background of the wording at the bottom in blue, with always the lettering in white. George has been painting in signs for us for over 65 years, and I think we're looking forward to the next 65. You're going to have a half a beer, George?
Oh, thank you.
Two halves of Bridport bitter, please, Steve.
I can't remember the first sign I done for Palmer's, but the accumulation of them, they must run into hundreds. I shan't retire as long as I can paint, as long as I can do the job, because I have no wife, no family. Therefore, it keeps me occupied.
Cheers. All the best.
George Biles, an artist whose work is hung over 70 pubs in the West Country. So if you want to see his work for yourself,